guys, I'm Joe, and I'm back for part 2 of my review of The Dark Knight Rises. And I apologize if the way it ended in part 1 was a little bit abrupt for some of you, but I'm here today to complete the rest of my review for The Dark Knight Rises, so let's take it away. Now, I left off talking about Bane and how he got control of Gotham City, and how he allowed a lot of the citizens to take back what was rightfully theirs, and so on, leaving Bruce in the pit and all that. Then it cuts to Bruce in the pit, with his back still broken, and he's trying to heal it up after he sees on TV what Bane has done to Gotham. And thanks to the two prisoners that are in the pit with him, he's able to get his back healed in a very, very not so easy to sit through kind of way. And this is another thing, of course, that people have complained about, that his back basically healed in 5 months. Well, no, it was not necessarily his back that was broken. It was a dislocated vertebra, or vertebrae, as the doctor says, as they hang him on a noose right around here or under his arms, and one of the prison doctors at least smacks his hand into Bruce's back.
Stay like this until you stand.
Once again, another part that makes me cringe. Ooh. And then Bruce has a dream of seeing Ra's al Ghul's ghost taunting him about how all the stuff that he tried to do as Batman, and the only thing he could have achieved was a lie. And now Gotham is beyond saving and must be allowed to die. And I still remember getting goosebumps hearing Liam Neeson's voice.
You do not think I would return, Bruce?
But it's also here that before he has the dream and during this dream, that you hear stories about a young child who was able to escape the prison, and the child had a protector, and that the child's father was a mercenary who worked for a local warlord, and that he fell in love with the warlord's daughter behind his back. And because of that, he was condemned to the pit, but he was allowed to go free because the warlord's daughter decided to take his place in the pit instead. And at some point before she got sentenced, they conceived a child, so therefore she tried raising her child in the prison, and one day during a riot, the mother was killed by the other prisoners, and one of the prisoners decided to protect the child. And the child gets out by climbing out of the pit, and it's during the dream sequence that Bruce is able to figure out that the mercenary was indeed a young Ra's al Ghul, and that his child is Bane. And after this dream, he becomes more determined to climb out of the pit, heal up, and get back to Gotham and save it for good. We see Bruce Wayne doing a lot of push-ups in the prison, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of the complaints, but people were wondering, well, wait a minute, what's with all the push-ups? That's really all he can do? Couldn't we seen a little more of that, though? About his retraining? Isn't it supposed to remind us of Batman Begins? Well, technically speaking, I don't think we really needed to see all that training again. We've already seen it, and Bruce already has that training from all those years ago. If he's that determined to save his city, he'll know exactly what to do in order to physically heal himself, a lot quicker at least. But I really like these scenes in the prison pit because, like I said, it reminds me of Batman Begins. Because in Batman Begins, you saw him in a prison and he was lost. And he was trying to find his way, which would eventually lead him to become Batman. And he hasn't been Batman for 8 years. It kind of reminds me of what Apollo says to Rocky in Rocky 3. When we fought, you had the eye of the tiger, you had the edge. Now you gotta get it back, and the only way to do that is to go back to the beginning. Basically, going back to your roots. If you do something in life so much that sometimes you tend to forget why you did it in the first place, and the only way to figure it out, to rediscover your passion and that fire inside of you, is to go back to your roots and build back upon that from there. And as Bane's men continue to impose their rule on Gotham City, Gordon and the rest of the cops are in hiding since Bane's army is hunting them all across the city. Gordon tries various ways to take back the city and to disarm the bomb, by even having a special forces team sneak in on one of the supply trucks and telling them what's going on. And even though they do come up with a plan, Bane's men discover them and Bane kills them and hangs them up on the bridge for the entire world to see. I'll die before I talk. I'm on your schedule, Captain. And the way Bane kills this guy, by putting his knee on the guy's neck, just like in the earlier scene, where Bane's henchmen grabbed Commissioner Gordon and brought him down to Bane's lair.
No, he's alone.
Once again, don't ever want to cross Bane. Ever. I also find it in a way a little bit funny the way Tom Hardy plays the character in that scene, where he has a sarcastic side to him. He's dead, so show me his body. Speaking of the humor, I saw this one YouTuber that I followed say that his biggest issue with The Dark Knight Rises is that it was just too dour and depressing, and that it was showered in depressing scenes. I'm sorry, but I just laughed when I saw that. And I've seen this criticism a few times for Nolan's films in general, that they're too joyless and they take themselves too seriously, and that there's no humor in them. Hey, little newsflash for you guys. Not everything has to be the Avengers, okay? As much as I like the Avengers, not every comic book movie or any film in general has to all be like that. And as one of my followers describes in his review on Letterboxd, there's different forms of humor that you could use. Not everything has to be in the style of Joss Whedon in The Avengers. And some of the examples I pointed out before, like the scenes between Bruce Wayne and Lucius Fox, or the humorous exchanges between Bruce and Alfred. Perhaps you should stop letting them into this side of the house. Perhaps you should start learning to make your own bed. Or even in the scene where Bruce puts on the knee brace for the first time.
Is it really painful?
You're very welcome to try it, Alfred.
Happy watching, thank you, sir.
And also, you have a lot of the humor through the character of Catwoman, and she gives that cheeky humor that is required here. It's not all dark and, oh god, it's Batman, I'm so sad. And some of the stuff I mentioned with Bane earlier, like killing his 2 henchmen down in his lair, I think it's a little bit of a dark humor, as my one follower described in his review. There's different kinds of humor that you can use in a movie. Not everything has to be Joss Whedon-like dialogue, or even something like Raimi's Spider-Man films, as much as I love those first 2 films, don't get me wrong. But not every movie has to be like that. Just like everything being dark and gritty doesn't equate to quality either. And in case you don't remember, the scene where the cop accidentally shoots Batman's electric gun, that I think is a really funny moment too. As Gordon and his men are trying to come up with a plan to stop Bane from blowing up the bomb, Bruce is stuck in the pit trying to get out. He has at least 2 attempts before he eventually makes it out alive. And other prisoners have tried to escape this too, and all these prisoners, when they see someone trying to climb out, they immediately go, Deshi, Deshi, Basara, Basara, Deshi, Deshi, Basara, Basara. And you hear that chant in one of the musical pieces that Hans Zimmer composed for the film. I think it's known as the Bane chant, which a lot of people seem to not really like the score as much in this one. A lot of it, yeah, has some themes that we've heard before, but The Dark Knight had some musical pieces that we've heard before in Batman Begins as well. You have the Bane chant in this one, and you also have the piano cues you hear for Catwoman. Da-da-da, da-da-da. So it wasn't all just more or less the same thing. You had some new stuff in there too. But back to Bruce climbing out of the pit. First time he tries to climb out, doesn't work. I told you it would not be possible. You said a child climbed out. But no ordinary child. A child fostered by pain. Not a man from privilege. And after Bane and his men kill the Special Forces team that tries to thwart them, in a fit of rage, Bruce becomes more determined to climb out of the pit. He tries to climb, doesn't work, once again, and then he later wakes up, and the other prison doctor, who we later learn worked on Bane's face when he was disfigured, he challenges Bruce on his fears, being afraid of death. How can you foster the impossible without the most powerful impulse of the spirit? Fear of death. And he says,
I do fear death. I fear dying in here. While my city burns. There's no one there to save it.
and it's this key point in the movie where I really think that Bruce Wayne is finally gone from point A to point B. Because another thing that I heard someone complain about is that Bruce Wayne's character was rushed and that he didn't learn anything or that he didn't have an arc. I completely disagree. And I'm sure some people have probably wondered, well, what's the arc supposed to be? I don't understand what he learns. Now, I've had to watch this a few times to get it, but the way I see it is this. He starts off in the beginning of the movie feeling like he's got nothing left to live for. After he's lost Rachel, his house, his money, Alfred has left him in order to stop him from going out in a blaze of glory. He's lost his physical health thanks to Bane, who broke his back. And as Batman, he's viewed as a murderer. And his parents are gone. He's lost everything. And then after Bane takes him to the prison, he's disappointed that Bane didn't kill him, but Bane tells him, no, that would have been too easy. I got something better in mind. Bruce Wayne starts off by having a death wish, and after he's put in the pit, after Bane takes over Gotham, and he has that dream of seeing Ra's al Ghul taunting him about his failures, this is the point where I think he's realized that everything he tried to do didn't work. He tried to get himself killed in a heroic sacrifice, but what did that gain him? Nothing. His city is still doomed. Bane still has control, and nobody else can save it except for him. He has enough courage to go out there and fight, but it's in that scene that he realizes the consequences, and he decides that he wants to live. But he has to do something else. He has to admit that he's scared. Now, what is he scared of? He admits to the doctor. It's not just the fear of death, but it's also the fear of failure, as I see it. He still wants to protect his city, but also do it in a way where he can finally move on, which I'll talk about later with the ending. But this is not the same fear that he was taught to face in Batman Begins. In Batman Begins, the arc was to not let his vengeful side consume him. This one, instead of overcoming his fear and purging his fear, as Ra's al Ghul taught him, he learned how to embrace the fear. Use it as a powerful motivator, because sometimes fear can motivate you to achieve your goal, even if you know it could cost you something, and in some extreme cases, maybe your own life, who knows. And there were 1 or 2 times in my life where I've been in that situation where I had to take a certain physical fitness test for the Army, and I thought for sure that I wasn't going to pass and possibly get processed out of the Army earlier than I anticipated. And I had this fear inside of me, but for some reason, my adrenaline was flying, and I was determined to pass that test. And you know what? Because of that fear, I passed. Just like Ra's al Ghul told him, to manipulate the fears in others, you must first master your own. And that's exactly what he does in order to jump from one edge to the other. And when he finally is able to voice this to the prison doctor, he tells him to make the climb as the child did, without the rope. And then the fear will find you again. Now, if you remember from Bruce's previous attempts and the other prisoner who tried to climb out, they used the safety rope in order to try to get from one edge to the other. And at this point, it's pretty clear that as long as you have that rope tied around you, you're not going to make it to the ledge that you need to get to. So you have to let go of your safety net, and you have to, in a way, risk something in order to achieve your end. And we've all been there at some point. We've all been stuck in our own rut in some way, in a dark pit of our own souls. We all know that there is a way out, but so often we get so worried about risking ourselves or risking our lives in some extreme cases, and we become too afraid to go from that one side of the edge to the other. It reminds me of the scene in The Last Crusade where the final trial that Indiana Jones has to go through is the leap of faith. And it also reminds me of something that my pastor said at my church. During one of the lessons he was giving, you have to go through purposeful pain in order to find healing. In this case, Bruce Wayne has to essentially risk his life. And even if he doesn't make it to the edge, he will fall from a great height and he'll die. But he climbs it without the safety net, knowing very well that he could die. And as Bruce starts to climb out of the pit, the prisoners start to say, Deshi, Deshi, Basara, Basara. And then Hans Zimmer's score slowly but surely starts swelling up with excitement, and the prisoners start chanting even louder and faster. It cuts from Bruce Wayne making it to the one ledge, to the prisoner making the chant. Everybody's looking up, the bats come flying out, in a similar way that happened to Bruce when he fell into that well as a child. And just real quick, I also see it as this, as a 3-movie character arc. When he fell into that well, how did he get out of there? Do you remember? He didn't climb out. His father came down and pulled him out. And after his second attempt to climb out of the well, you get a flashback of Bruce's father coming down saying, why do we fall? And at the end of Batman Begins, he puts these boards over the well and hammers it shut. Basically, he's been stuck in this pit his entire life. He hasn't really climbed out of it yet. And it's here where he's able to finally find the strength to rise up out of that pit for good. But anyway, the bats come flying out, he gets scared for a second, but then he stands up, puts his hand on the wall, closes his eyes, takes a deep breath, and then... This is by far my favorite scene in the entire film. It is so inspiring, and I just want to pump my fists in the air and scream, yeah! He climbs up out of the pit, throws the rope down for the rest of the prisoners to get out, and he makes his way back to Gotham City. And since I mentioned that, let's talk about one of the biggest criticisms that I've heard from people. How did Bruce Wayne get back into Gotham City so quickly? Let me tell you, I've heard this millions and millions of times from people, and it drives me nuts every time I hear it. A lot of people think that Bruce Wayne got back to Gotham City within like 2 days or so. Obviously they don't show how he got back, but there's many different ways that he could have gotten back into the city. And also, before we see him climb out of the pit, Lucius Fox and Miranda Tate are talking to the Special Forces team about the bomb. Lucius Fox says that the bomb will go off in 23 days. Now I'm going to do a little math for you guys. 23 days. What's 7 times 3? Basic math? 21. How many days are in a week? 7. You multiply that by 3, you get 21. And what's 21 plus 2? 23. Okay? You still following me? How long is that? 3 weeks and 2 days. 3 weeks and 2 days. Not 1 day, and not 2 hours like some people would have you believe. Because right after the Special Forces team is killed, the next thing we see is Bruce Wayne try to climb out, he fails, and then he finally comes out. So he had 3 weeks and 2 days to come back from wherever he was being held at to Gotham City, plan out his tactics, place the fire bat symbol on that bridge, and have the bag of stuff set up for John Blake when he later would go to Wayne Enterprises. He had more than enough time to get back into Gotham City and figure out what his plan was. It wasn't 2 days, and it wasn't 4 hours either, as some people have tried to claim it was. And if he traveled around the world for 7 years without any resources at all, money or credit cards, anything, there's no reason why he can't do that again. And after all that training he's had, and him being a trained escapist, he knows his way around, and he knows Gotham inside and out. He could have gotten in on his Batwing, he could have snuck in on one of the supply trucks, through the sewers. There's many different ways he could have gotten in. And I guarantee you that if we did see like 2 or 3 scenes of how he got back into the city, people would have probably flipped their crap, saying, "Why did you show that? There's too much exposition." I don't really think it was necessary to show how exactly he got back into the city. I mean, would it have been nice to see it? It probably would have. And admittedly, it does kind of bug me, but when I think about it, yeah, how interesting could that story have actually been? So Bruce runs into Selina after she saves a young boy from these 2 thugs, and she's obviously very surprised and very relieved that Bruce is still alive, and they both agree to help each other out. She helps him stop Bane, and he gives her a fresh start that she wants. And it's at this point Selina's finally coming to her senses, because earlier on in the movie, at the middle part, after the rich people have been taken away, you see Selina walking around in this apartment, holding this picture of this family, and her friend, Holly, if I'm not mistaken, asks her why she's feeling depressed, and she goes, "This was someone's home." Well, it's everyone's home now. Come on, this is what you wanted. But the look on her face says it all. No, this isn't what I wanted. After learning that Bruce was actually a good person despite his rich status, and seeing what Bane and his men were capable of by killing people, deep down, even she has her own moral code. She knows that this is wrong, and Bruce clearly sees that underneath her, even though she likes to put on that facade. After he tells her that the bomb's still gonna go off, she finally goes, "Okay, I'll help you out." So she gets him to Lucius Fox and Miranda Tate, and Lucius and Bruce sneak away to the other hiding place that we saw in Dark Knight for Batman, and they come up with their own plan to figure out how to stop Bane. And Gordon and his men are caught by Bane's army, and they're sentenced to death by exile, by walking out onto the ice until it cracks and they fall into the frozen water and die. And while also John Blake is trying to find a way to save them by getting the underground cops out from under the sewers, but of course, he gets caught by Bane's henchmen and is almost killed. But then, Batman shows up with a flare that he leaves on the ice for Gordon to pick up. And it leads to a really cool scene where you see the fire bat symbol, which lets people know that Batman is back, including Bane.
This blocks the signal to the bomb. Get it on before sunrise. I might hit the button when it starts.
When what starts?
War.
And then Batman goes over to save John Blake and tells it to get as many people out as he can. And then it cuts to the next day where you see all the cops that have escaped from the sewers lined up ready to go. And real quick before I get to that, another thing that I've heard people complain about is that how come Gordon was outsmarted again and all those cops were left down in the sewers? Well, of course, not every cop was caught down there. Gordon is a cop. John Blake is a cop, and he had other fellow officers helping him out too, wearing plain clothes of course so they couldn't get caught. But it wasn't the first time that Gotham City Police have been beaten to a pulp in a lot of ways by the main villain. Batman Begins, most of the police department was on the Narrows Island when Ra's al Ghul exploded the microwave emitter in that area. And the entire police department was all over the city trying to figure out which hospital the Joker planted the bombs in. And Gordon was just as determined in this one to stop Bane, so he sent everything he had down into the sewers. So, again, wasn't the first time that he's been outsmarted before by the villain. And another thing real quick, how come there was no thick beards on the cops? Well, Bane and his men were sending clothing, food, and toiletry supplies down into the sewers. I mean, in order to try to stay fair, I suppose. So he wasn't completely ruthless in some way, so I don't know. But anyway, the cops are lined up on the street, ready to take on Bane's army. And they slowly start to walk towards them, led by Deputy Commissioner Foley in his police uniform. And Bane orders the men to open fire, and one of the tumblers points its turret at the cops ready to fire, but then all of a sudden the Batwing shows up, disables the turret, and flies away, and the cops see this, and it's one of the most jaw-dropping scenes I've ever seen. It's the music. Whoa, man. Incredible. And while all this is going on, Batman comes out and faces Bane once again.
So you came back to die with your city?
I came back to stop you.
The fight fight starts, Selena Kyle blows a hole in one of the tunnels, allowing the people to escape, and then she stops wondering if she wants to go back and help Batman. And then also, Gordon and his men are trying to figure out which truck the bomb is on, and John Blake gets the kids out of the boys' home that he visited to go around the city warning people that the bomb's gonna go off and to get out while they still can. And this whole fight between Batman and Bane, once again, it's awesome. And a lot of people say that the fight choreography in the Nolan trilogy is very poor. Again, this is a grounded and realistic take on the character. Fights in real life don't look like something in Batman v Superman in the warehouse scene. I love the Batman Arkham games, but real life fighting does not look like this. And have you ever watched a real life boxing match? It's not as fancy as in some of the Rocky movies either. This was a more realistic take, as I've said before, and it's the emotions that are driving the story and the scenes. And that's what makes it really entertaining to watch. And their fight leads them up to the steps in this one building. Batman breaks one of the seals on Bane's mask, and he keeps pounding away, and Bane becomes even furious and starts firing away with his punches. He's swinging and swinging, then Batman finally gets the upper hand, kicks him through the doors, grabs a shotgun, and tosses it over to Miranda Tate, tells her to cover the door, and he's screaming, "Where's the trigger? Where is it?" And then he says,
"Tell me where the trigger is. Then you have my permission to die."
The best comeback ever. But then right after this, after Bane and Batman exchange some words, Miranda Tate comes up behind Batman and stabs him in the back with a knife and reveals herself to be Talia al Ghul, Ra's al Ghul's daughter. And she actually was the child who climbed out of the pit, and the prisoner who protected her was Bane, who as a result of protecting her was disfigured by the other prisoners. And then, once she found her father, she brought her father and the League to save Bane, took him in, and eventually, over time, because of his extreme nature, due to what happened to him in the prison pit, Ra's al Ghul excommunicated him. That even for him it was too much to control. And it also, Bane loved Talia. And until her father died, Talia couldn't forgive her father. And so therefore, after he died, she decided to recruit Bane, bring the League of Shadows back, wait for the right time to strike back at Gotham, which is exactly what they're doing. Now, once again, a lot of people have said that this twist was completely out of nowhere and that it was too much too late. Now, I can see what they're saying, but to be honest, I don't really feel that way at all, because there's little hints that she gives throughout the movie by saying certain things like restoring balance to the world, or do what's necessary. And that scar she has on her back comes from that branding tool that Ken Watanabe had in Batman Begins. And those things that she said, restoring balance and what's necessary and so on, who does that remind you of? She's exactly like her father. Similar to M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense, there's certain hints that they drop in order for the big twist that eventually occurs. This doesn't really hurt the film for me personally. I mean, granted, I kinda knew she was gonna be Talia al Ghul, even though they denied for a while that she was. But there was a point for a while where I thought, okay, maybe she isn't really Talia. Maybe this child really is Bane. But then, of course, it occurred to me while I was watching it for the first time, maybe this is a lie. Maybe Talia is the actual child. But still, I tried to play by its terms, and eventually, of course, it's revealed that she is indeed the child who climbed out. And some people have argued that there's basically no character to her and her motivations aren't really clear. Well, actually, it is, I think, because she wants to finish what her father started. The motivation is pretty clear in that regard. And also, Bane is actually a lot more complex than he appears. As I said, he never held much value in human life, but he did hold value in one life. Talia. When he discovered her as a child and the other prisoners were trying to kill her, it's one thing to kill another person. I mean, I would never advocate killing or murder or anything, but it's one thing to kill an adult. Hurting a child? That's another thing entirely. Even Bane has standards, despite growing up in a prison, not really having a positive guardian in his life. He cared about her and was willing to do anything to protect her. Some people might find Bane's motivations not really clear. Well, the way I see it is this. I would say that he feels guilty about being alienated by the League of Shadows. As he says, he wants to fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny. Not once does he ever demean Ra's al Ghul when he talks about him. He still has a love and respect for him for taking him into the League and training him when he was down. And he obviously cared about Talia, so when she took him back, he was willing to do anything to accomplish that goal that Ra's al Ghul initially set out to do. So similar to the other two main characters, he was trying to find redemption in some ways, trying to climb out of his own pit by accomplishing the League of Shadows' original mission. Then Talia leaves, but not before telling Bane to not kill Batman in order to feel the fire and the consequences of his actions. So she leaves, and here is where a lot of people seem to think that Talia basically nullified Bane and that Bane was just now a pathetic character. Well, actually, no, that's not the case. Because what does he do after she leaves? I mean, she tells him, don't kill Batman, but what does he do? Kicks him to the ground and points a shotgun in his face ready to pull the trigger and says, "You'll just have to imagine the fire." All that stuff that I mentioned, basically that's him saying, I'm gonna blow your freaking head off because of what you did to me. And even before we find out who Talia really is, the men that work for Bane, they clearly fear him and they consider him their leader. Especially that guy in the plane sequence who Bane tells him to stay behind, saying, "Expect one of us in the wreckage, brother." Have we started the fire? Yes. The fire rises. Another example, Darth Vader may have answered to somebody else, but he was still very much his own man. He was a really key figure in the Empire, just like Bane was an important figure in the League of Shadows, and feared by his men also. And Darth Vader had his own agenda as well, protecting his son Luke. He was not going to just hand over his son to the Emperor, because he knew what the Emperor was capable of. But we'll talk about that eventually when I get to Star Wars, which I can't wait to talk about. Anyway, but before Bane can pull the trigger, Catwoman shows up and blows Bane away with a missile. This is one of the problems I have with this movie. The way Bane dies, that's weak. I would have liked at least one final confrontation between the two, at least before Catwoman shows up and kills him, because it's kind of abrupt and out of nowhere. But then Catwoman's line of,
About the whole no guns thing, I'm not sure I feel as strongly about it as you do.
Meanwhile, John Blake and the other citizens are on the one bridge that Bane didn't destroy, trying to get past the cops that are there. John Blake tries to cross the bridge, but the cops try to discourage him by shooting at him, and then they blow up the bridge. While all this is going on, Catwoman and Batman are trying to stop Talia back towards the reactor, and they eventually push her down to this lower highway, therefore killing her with Gordon on board, trying to disarm the bomb. They show up, and Talia reveals that she booby-trapped the reactor that Lucius Fox is in by flooding it, therefore rendering it completely useless. Lucius manages to escape, of course, thankfully, but Talia revels in the idea that her father's work is done, and then she dies rather awkwardly. Oh well, whatever. Doesn't matter. So Batman decides to connect one of the cables to the bomb and fly it out over the water without any autopilot to it. Catwoman kisses Batman goodbye, and Gordon finally has one last exchange with Batman. I never cared who you were.
And you were right.
But shouldn't the people know the hero who saved them? And he says,
A hero can be anyone, even a man doing something as simple and reassuring as putting a coat around a young boy's shoulders to let him know the world had an end.
and let me tell you, when they flash back to a young Jim Gordon putting a coat around Bruce Wayne as a boy after his parents were killed, with Hans Zimmer's score, it's touching. I love that part. So Batman flies the bomb out over the water for John Blake and the boys on the bus to see, and everybody else on the bridge sees this, and as he flies out further over the water, the choir part of the music starts to go, ah, and Batman has a look of peace and serenity on his face, knowing that this is it. And John Blake's looking out at Batman, realizing what's about to happen. The bomb blows up, far out enough that there's no nuclear fallout, but the city is safe, and Batman basically gave his own life. Now to go back for a second, in the alleyway scene where Catwoman borrows the Batpod, and she says, you don't owe these people anything. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
I still remember watching this back then, and I thought, Batman's gonna die. You gotta be kidding me. But even though the bomb went off, I still had a part of me that said, he has to be alive. This can't be true. And then, as everybody comes out of their homes, you hear a voiceover from Jim Gordon, reciting a few lines from A Tale of Two Cities, which is part of a funeral for Bruce Wayne, where Gordon, Lucius Fox, John Blake, and Alfred have attended. And at this point, peace has finally been achieved in Gotham. And this part here,
I failed you. You trusted me. And I failed you.
oh, that scene, I can't take it. Just thinking about it, I'm gonna lose it. And right after that, Gordon asks John Blake if he's gonna change his mind about quitting the Force. John Blake expresses his disgust over the corruption that still exists, despite what they've accomplished, and his disappointment that nobody's ever gonna know who saved the city. Gordon says, they know. It was the Batman. and Batman is now viewed as a hero. The city built a statue dedicated to his memory, and Gotham has finally embraced Batman as a hero they deserved. And after that, Wayne Enterprises declares that Bruce Wayne's home, Wayne Manor, will now be a boys' home for the city's at-risk and orphan children, much to John Blake's relief. And he shows up at Wayne Enterprises to pick up a bag. And it's here where I remember freaking the hell out, along with my mom, looking at each other going, when he tells the lady his name, and she can't find it, and he goes, oh, here, try my legal name. And I remember watching it going, legal name? And she says,
I like that name. Robin.
thanks. Robin? Robin? I know that Nolan has said publicly that Robin will never show up in his movies, and really, he's not in his movies. I mean, yeah, it's the name, but the way I see it is this. It's a reminder of the partnership between Robin and Batman. And because Robin, or John Blake in this one, I see as an amalgamation of 3 different Robins, and I'm sure other people have pointed this out too, but he's a combination of the 3 Robins that Batman has partnered with throughout the comic book history. Dick Grayson, who was an orphan, and was also a cop at one time, Jason Todd, who had a lot of anger problems, which John Blake has talked about, and Tim Drake, who was able to deduce Batman and Robin's identities, which is exactly what John Blake does in this one. And like I said, it's a reminder of that partnership between those two. I only have one complaint about it though. I think there could have been another scene or two fleshing out that relationship between those two a little more, maybe showing how exactly John Blake knew to go to Wayne Enterprises and get the stuff that eventually leads him to the Batcave. Even though I do like how Bruce Wayne, when he talks to John Blake a couple times, that he sees John as his future successor as the Batman. So he obviously had to have planned out a letter for him at some point telling him to go to this location. I think 1 or 2 scenes would have helped us clear that up a little bit, but still, I like that Bruce was able to determine that this guy would be his future successor. And then we get to the ending, where Lucius Fox discovers that the autopilot has been fixed by Bruce Wayne. John Blake goes to the Batcave, and then you later see Alfred go to the same cafe that he told Bruce about earlier on. And that classic Batman music by Hans Zimmer's playing in the background. John Blake goes into the Batcave, a group of bats swarm down in on him, just like what happened with Bruce Wayne and Batman Begins. And then Jim Gordon discovers on the rooftop of the GCPD that the bat signal's been fixed. And he looks around, seeing if Batman's out there. And then also, Alfred, who's at the table ordering a drink, looks around, and he stops, and I'll tell you, every time that part comes up, I always go, yes! And then John Blake walks further into the Batcave, and then he ends up on the rising platform, and the music blares, and it cuts to black, and it says, The Dark Knight Rises. I'm just gonna say it, this is by far the greatest ending to a movie I have ever seen in my life. Wraps up everything so perfectly in a nice little bow. All that stuff that I mentioned, I'm at a loss for words here. It's a perfect ending. I love it. And one more thing to address. A lot of people don't like how Bruce Wayne finally gave up being Batman by saying Bruce Wayne would never give up being Batman. He never would. How could he go on living a normal life? Again, like I said in part 1, he never intended to be Batman for the rest of his life. He knew at some point that he was going to have to give this up. Remember in The Dark Knight, he was looking at Harvey Dent to take on the mantle to be Gotham's savior? And even in Batman Begins, Rachel hinted at it by saying, maybe someday when Gotham no longer needs Batman, I'll see him again. Again, Bruce Wayne never intended to do this for the rest of his life, even though he did ponder the idea maybe in The Dark Knight. And things don't go on forever in real life. Come on, people, this isn't the comics. The Dark Knight Returns may be a good what-if scenario, but realistically speaking, Bruce Wayne is not going to be able to carry on into his 40s and 50s. Let alone his 60s. Being Batman is a very physically demanding job, as we've seen in all 3 of these movies. And Bruce knew that somebody out there was going to have to take on the mantle at some point, and he was going to have to move on, which is exactly what he does, by living his life with Selina Kyle, who's now wearing a blue dress and Bruce's mother's pearls. Another symbol that she's finally able to get a fresh start in life, just like he was looking for earlier on. Batman dies in a way, but Bruce Wayne finally lives. He's able to move on, and he's free to live his life in peace. So Nolan, I think, made a really wise choice, and did that character a service by saying, alright Batman, you're hanging up the cape and cowl, but we're gonna keep you alive. I don't really know another way of putting it. I love that ending. I really like the direction that they went. Enough said. So those are my thoughts on The Dark Knight Rises. Despite a couple of gripes and nitpicks and maybe certain things that I think they could have fleshed out a little more, personally, I love the movie and I think it's a great conclusion to this trilogy and one of the best endings to a series that I've ever seen. Sue me. I love The Dark Knight Rises. So what are your guys' thoughts on The Dark Knight Rises? Comment below and tell me what you thought of it. Whatever your thoughts are, you love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? I'm prepared regardless, and I will see you guys next time.
So that's what that feels like.